Jay-Z just sold out Yankee Stadium 3 nights in a row, and the moment that third show ended, the entire industry started whispering one dangerous question out loud. Not how did he do it? How did he get away with it? Because if the whispers circling this man are even half true, the guy standing on that stage with the fresh cut and the $200,000 grin is not just the greatest success story hip-hop has ever produced. He might be the smoothest long con the culture ever stood up and applauded. 3 nights. 1 stadium. Tens of thousands of people screaming every single lyric back at him. And get this, the show reportedly opened with Beyonce herself cutting his hair right there in front of everybody. Like a coronation, like a ritual, like she was unveiling the old Brooklyn version of him under the lights before he touched a single beat. Baby, that is not a concert. That is a king reminding his subjects exactly who he is. But here is where it gets messy, because the louder that stadium roared, the louder the old ghost got. The producers who built the 90s. The rappers who came up beside him. The executives who signed the checks. A whole lot of people watched Jay-Z conquer the Bronx, and their reaction was not pride. It was a slow, knowing nod. The kind you give a magician who finally performed the trick in broad daylight. And tonight we are pulling that trick apart piece by piece. The borrowed flows. The abandoned brothers. The song he stole from a man who publicly dissed him and turned into a love anthem with his future wife. The family story he told on camera that made people's stomachs turn. The business deals he signed while entire movements were boycotting the very companies he was cashing out with. By the time we are done, you are going to understand why one industry CEO looked a room full of people in the eye and said nobody makes money with Jay-Z but Jay-Z. Stay with me, because this story starts with a crown and ends with a mirror. Now, let us be fair before we get disrespectful, because the receipts on the greatness side of this ledger are genuinely insane. Jay-Z has been active for over 3 decades. 17 albums. Millions upon millions of records moved. Hip-hop's first bona fide billionaire. A man who went from the record label trenches, from an era where they would not even let an artist like him do certain things, all the way to being the president of a label, to flipping a Samsung deal that bent the rules of how albums even go platinum, to headlining stadiums like a rock band. People who watched all 3 Yankee Stadium nights said he looked like the old Jay-Z, the hungry one, the Brooklyn one. Except now he is doing it at an age when most of his peers are doing podcasts and reality shows. Reviews coming out of those shows have been nothing short of crazy. And honestly, whether you love him or cannot stand him, there is an argument sitting right there on the table that this is the single greatest career hip-hop has ever seen. Flowers were due a long time ago. And yet, here is the part that fascinates me, because for a man with that resume, the sheer volume of people who do not like Jay-Z is almost astounding. Not rivals. Not haters on the internet. Respected voices. Veterans. People who were in the rooms. It is like he is hip-hop's most talented supervillain, celebrated in public and side-eyed in private. And the deeper you dig into why, the more you realize this did not start last year or last decade. It started in 1996, the year he dropped his debut, the year everything should have begun. Except 1996 was also the year everybody who was anybody in rap decided to release a classic at the exact same time. And that is where our story really starts. With a man who got lost in the shuffle and decided he would never, ever be lost again. See, people forget what 1996 actually looked like. That year was a bloodbath of greatness. Tupac dropped All Eyes on Me. Then another album landed after he was gone. Biggie was on the run-up to Life After Death. Mobb Deep, Outkast, Ice Cube, everybody who mattered was releasing damn near career-defining music. And right in the middle of that avalanche, a kid from Marcy named Sean Carter put out his first record, and the culture collectively shrugged. Jay-Z was not the hottest artist that year. He was not the second hottest. He was, to put it plainly, lost in the sauce, a talented guy in a year full of titans. And for a long time, there was a whole wing of the culture that refused to let him forget it. The talk back then was brutal, and it was consistent. Jay-Z was not really popping while the other two were alive. When Tupac and Biggie were breathing, the conversation was them, and Jay-Z was somewhere down the list, a guest in his own city. It was not until they were gone that the throne sat empty long enough for him to walk up and sit in it. And y'all, that observation alone would have been a footnote, just barbershop talk, if it was not for what came attached to it. Because right behind the timing argument came a nastier accusation, one that has dogged Jay-Z his entire career and never fully let go. Swaggerjacking. The claim that a chunk of that legendary catalog was assembled from other men's parts. People had been saying for years that Jay-Z borrowed flows, borrowed cadences, borrowed whole rhyme patterns, and the name that kept coming up over and over was the notorious B.I.G. rival MCs. Put it on wax, flat out asking how much of Biggie's rhymes were going to come out of his mouth. And to be quite honest, if you line the records up side by side, it is not a reach. Jay-Z has used a lot of Biggie's lines, sometimes as tribute, sometimes as muscle, sometimes in ways that left fans arguing about where homage ends and harvesting begins. Now, borrowing from your dead friend in New York rap was not exactly a crime. People did it, but the volume of it, the consistency of it, the way it always seemed to land right where a hit needed to land, that is what made veteran producers and rival crews murmur. The whispers were always there. And what used to be 100% off limits in hip-hop, touching another man's signature, Jay-Z did it so smoothly and so successfully that he basically made it cool. That takes a certain kind of mind. And if you think that mind stopped at Biggie, wait until you hear what he did to Tupac, because that is the story that still makes insiders shake their heads to this day. And let me paint that shuffle properly, because the scale of it matters. Tupac came in 1996, already a phenomenon, and All Eyes on Me was a double album event that swallowed the entire year whole. And then Machiavelli landed after he was gone and froze the culture in place all over again. Biggie was moving like a man who knew the crown was his, and life after death was loaded and waiting. Mobb Deep had the streets in a headlock. Outkast was reinventing what Southern rap was even allowed to sound like. Dr. Octagon was bending the genre into shapes nobody had heard before. Every single lane was occupied by a giant operating at full power. And into that traffic stepped Jay-Z with a debut that the real heads respected, sure, but respect is not dominance. He was a very good artist in a year that only remembered the great ones. That is not hate, that is the timeline, and the timeline is exactly why the next accusation cut so deep. Because the talk was never that Jay-Z was whack. The talk was that Jay-Z was adjacent, standing next to greatness, studying greatness, absorbing greatness, and waiting for greatness to leave the room. When Tupac passed in 96 and Biggie passed in 97, the two loudest voices in the culture went silent within 6 months of each other, and the man who had been orbiting both of them stepped directly into the vacuum with a fully formed style that sounded, to a whole lot of ears, suspiciously familiar. Would we still have heard of Jay-Z if both of those men lived? Probably. The talent was real. Would we be talking about him today the way we talk about him today? That is the question people have been asking in barbershops for almost 30 years, and nobody has ever answered it comfortably, because deep down everybody knows the honest answer is, we will never know. And that not knowing is the foundation his entire mythology is built on. He did not take the crown. The crown got left unattended, and he was simply the only man in the room disciplined enough to pick it up without ever looking like he reached for it. So let us set the scene. It is the early 2000s, Blueprint 2 era, and Jay-Z is quietly moving with Beyonce behind the curtain. The first single they blessed the world with is 03 Bonnie and Clyde, the record that announced them to the planet as hip-hop's new royal couple. Beautiful song. Massive hit. Radio loved it. There is just one small problem, and once you hear it you cannot unhear it. 03 Bonnie and Clyde is a remake. A remake of Tupac's Me and My Girlfriend. Now pause right there, because remaking records is nothing new in hip-hop. Snoop remade Lodi Dodi. Everybody remade something. That is not the scandal. The scandal is who he remade it from. Jay-Z and Tupac were not friends. Let us not pretend they hung out together. Let us not pretend they had anything remotely close to what Tupac and Biggie had, because that relationship was real and documented. Pac and Big had a song together that never even came out. They freestyled together. Pac used to bring Biggie out in the middle of his concerts, used to fly out to New York just to kick it with him. That was brotherhood. Jay-Z and Tupac. There was no brotherhood. If anything, there was friction, and people who were around back then remember the subliminals flying in Jay-Z's direction before Pac passed. Which brings us to the part that still gives people chills, and I want you to sit with the sheer nerve of what this man actually did. Jay-Z took a song from an artist who had dissed him, remade it, put his girlfriend on it, released it as the lead single of his album, and added it to his catalog like it was always his. I have never heard of anything like it before or since. Nobody remakes the record of a man who was publicly shooting at them. Nobody. The legend goes that when the single first got played for the inner circle, the room watched the video, everybody clapped, and then there was this dead silence, because somebody finally asked the question out loud. Why is Jay-Z redoing a Tupac song when Tupac did not rock with Jay-Z? And the story says Dame Dash looked around that quiet room and joked that somebody better call Jay-Z and tell him what had been said about him. Everybody laughed. Nobody answered the question. And baby, that moment right there is the Rosetta Stone for understanding everything that came after. Because what it revealed was not pettiness. It was business logic of an almost frightening purity. Jay-Z understood something that most artists never learn. A song is not a grudge. A song is an asset. Tupac's name still moved units. Tupac's melodies still made money. The beef was over, the man was gone, and the catalog was sitting there full of convertible value. Most people would call that disrespect. Jay-Z called it Tuesday. And this is the exact moment, insiders say, where you first start seeing the cracks in the armor, where the people around him begin to realize that the street loyalty they signed up for had already been quietly traded in for something colder. The man had told us 100 times what he was. He said it in interviews. He said it in rhymes. He was not a businessman. He was a businessman. People just did not understand what he meant until it was too late. Because once you accept that Jay-Z is playing a different game than everybody around him, the body count starts making sense. Look at the people who built the house with him. Dame Dash is the name everybody knows. The man who was there from the trenches. The man who helped turn a street dream into an empire. And when the empire finally started printing money, Dame Dash ended up on the outside of it, watching his financial problems pile up in public while his former partner became a billionaire. People have asked the obvious question for years. Jay-Z could have solved Dame's money problems with what he spends on a weekend, so why not do it? On the strength of coming up together alone, why not do it? And the answer, according to the people who watched it happen, is chilling in its simplicity. That is something you do in the street game. That is not something you do in the business game. And Jay-Z stopped playing the street game a long time ago. The folks who came up with him did fine. He took care of the day ones to a point. But the new inner circle, the later believers, a lot of them did not fare well at all. And some of the people who helped establish the whole thing made out with nothing. Now compare that to what loyalty looks like on the other side of the New York fence, because 50 Cent built a completely different model. Say what you want about 50, and people say plenty, but when 50 Cent tours, his guys tour. When 50 Cent eats, the whole crew eats, and they will tell you that to your face with pride. There is a story people still repeat about being at TRL with one of 50's artists, and someone in the room saying out loud, "You do not have to worry about nothing. You got 50. Jay-Z does not do nothing for these guys like 50 does." And here's the thing. Nobody in that room argued. Memphis Bleek is the other name that comes up every single time this conversation happens, because Bleek is maybe the most loyal soldier Jay-Z ever had. Loyal like a bodyguard, loyal like a little brother, and fans have been pointing out for years that when Jay-Z does those massive Beyonce-adjacent shows, those victory lap stadium moments, you do not see Memphis Bleek getting brought out on stage. You do not see him getting the look, the bag, the moment. Bleek himself has joked about eating his own halo, and the joke lands a little too close to the bone, because everybody watching understands what he is really saying. The loyalty ran one direction. And this is where the quote drops that basically detonated inside the industry. A CEO, and get this, a white executive at a major label, not a bitter ex-rapper with an axe to grind, stood up in a room and said it plain. Nobody makes money with Jay-Z but Jay-Z. Nobody that gets in business with him makes money but him. Insiders say it was the first time a lot of people heard someone with real power publicly speak on Jay-Z that way, and once it was said out loud, it could not be unsaid. Suddenly, every abandoned partnership, every quiet exit, every artist who signed with high hopes and left with nothing got pulled into one frame. Think about how many people banged on Roc Nation's door, trying to get in position, failed, and walked away hating that man. The list is longer than the discography. Now, I want to be careful here, because being dogged by rumors is nothing new for a superstar. It genuinely comes with the territory, and I personally do not believe in dragging anybody's wife or anybody's family business into the street. Family is supposed to be off limits. But some stories Jay-Z tells on himself, and one of those stories is the one that made a whole lot of people look at him sideways, and it came out of his own mouth, on camera, sitting across from Kevin Hart. Jay-Z was explaining why he does not love going to family functions, and the reason he gave was that somebody might ask him for $4,800. His example was a cousin in grandma's living room pitching him a play, like, "Yo, if you just give me that $4,800, I could flip it into $2 million for you." And Jay-Z's whole point was, it does not work like that. The audience laughed. Kevin Hart laughed. But a lot of people watching did not laugh, and the internet has never let that clip die, because think about what he actually admitted. You are a billionaire, and somebody in your bloodline still has to catch you at a cookout to ask for less than $5,000. The counterargument wrote itself instantly. If I had billions, nobody in my family would ever have to ask me for $4,800, because they would already be straight. That is the whole point of making it. And what got under people's skin was not even the stinginess. It was how comfortably he said it, how the room full of regular people just nodded along like, "Oh, that is cool." No, that is not cool. If you got $1 billion, your whole family should be straight. Full stop. But y'all, the family questions do not stop at cousins and cookouts, because there is one alleged rumor that has followed Jay-Z and Beyonce for years and simply will not die, and it lives in the math. The official story is that they met when she was 18 and started dating about a year and a half later, when she was 19. Clean, legal, respectable. The problem is that Jay-Z himself sat down with Charlie Rose and said they met 10 years before a date that, when you run the numbers, lands in 1997, which would have made her underage. Now, their explanation is that they met young but waited a good while before anything started, which, for the record, is exactly the same thing Kylie and Tyga said, and the public did not exactly buy it over there either. They have a 12-year age gap. And in the era of Me Too, at the zenith of the R. Kelly trial, when the whole culture was re-examining exactly these kinds of timelines, this alleged rumor came back around and started dogging him all over again, and it continues to dog him to this very day. I am not telling you what to believe. I am telling you the math has never fully added up in public, and Jay-Z has never sat down and cleared it. And you know who smelled blood in that water first? Of course it was 50 Cent. Because New York is competitive. New York is cutthroat. New York is the mecca where the whole culture was born, and New Yorkers believe they hold the ultimate claim to hip-hop, which means the crown is always contested. 50 Cent has been on the competition's neck since day one, messy, relentless, no decorum whatsoever, and when 50 weighed in on Jay-Z's marriage, that was the moment a lot of people realized it was open season. 50 basically argued that Jay-Z was not sitting where he was sitting until he married that woman. He framed the wedding like a business deal, saying that when Jay signed that contract, and he meant the marriage contract, the trophies came rolling in, Grammys falling from the sky left and right. The insinuation was brutal. Jay-Z's legend got refinanced by Beyonce's halo. Almost like an arranged merger, two brands consolidating market share. Now, is that fair? Probably not entirely. The man was already great before the wedding. But the fact that 50 could say it and millions of people nodded tells you exactly how much of Jay-Z's image lives downstream of his marriage, and Jay-Z knows it, which is why you will notice he has never once answered it directly. And y'all, once that quote was out in the world, it became a skeleton key, because suddenly every strange little story from the empire's history snapped into focus. The artists who signed with dreams and left with silence. The producers who built classics and never saw the back end. The collaborators who gave Jay-Z their best years and got a handshake and a name drop in return. Clique members said it in interviews. Noriega said it. Bleak danced around it for a decade before finally letting the truth slip on a podcast mic. Even the defenders, when you press them, do not actually defend the pattern. They defend the right to the pattern. They say he does not owe anybody anything. Which, fine, maybe he does not. But that is a legal answer to a moral question. Because here is what people keep circling back to. For 30 years, Jay-Z has presented himself as the embodiment of the culture's highest possibility, the proof that a kid from Marcy could beat the machine at its own game. And he did. Nobody can take that away. But when you beat the machine, and then you turn around and become the machine, the people standing where you used to stand are going to notice, and they are going to talk, and no amount of stadium shows will ever fully drown them out. That is the tension running underneath every headline about this man. And it is the reason a victory lap in the Bronx turned into a full-scale cultural audit within a week of the last encore. And look, this is not even the full inventory of the life and times of Sean Carter, not by a long shot, because a career this long collects incidents the way a yacht collects barnacles. There was the elevator. The night Solange went at him in that tight little box of security cameras and flashing lights, and Jay-Z stood there and kept his cool while the whole internet slow motion replayed it for a month. Credit where it is due. The man did not flinch. There was the Nas battle, and let us keep it a buck. Jay-Z lost that battle. Ether is still standing. But here is the part that tells you who you are dealing with. He lost the battle and somehow won the decade, recovered so completely that half the people under 30 do not even know there was a war. There was Blueprint 2, the bloated double album that dropped with a thud and never came close to the standard he had set for himself. There was the fallout with Kanye West, a slow-motion brotherhood breakdown that played out in verses and award show tension for years, and depending on whose side you take, Jay-Z was either the patient big brother or the calculating king protecting his lane. Every empire has that hallway of broken doors. And then there is the Rock Nation question, the one that never gets a straight answer. Because if you actually audit the empire, a strange pattern jumps off the page. Almost nobody got rich under Jay-Z. A couple of artists made it, sure. But look at who they are. Rihanna, Kanye West. And ask yourself the honest question. Is there any universe where Rihanna does not become a star without him? Is there any timeline where Kanye West does not become Kanye West? These are undeniable, once-a-generation talents. They were breaking out with or without the cosign, and Jay-Z, being the sharpest talent evaluator the culture has ever seen, simply made sure he was standing next to them with paperwork when it happened. That is not artist development. That is real estate. He does not build the building. He buys the block right before the neighborhood turns. Genius? Absolutely. But let us call it what it is. Now here is where the conversation turns from business to something heavier, because the criticism that stings Jay-Z the most in recent years has nothing to do with rap at all. It is about the moves he makes when the community is watching. After the NFL boycott, after Colin Kaepernick got frozen out, and the culture drew a line and said we are standing on this side of it, Jay-Z partnered with the NFL. When the Target boycott had people organized and energized and asking every black dollar to stay home, Jay-Z turned around and did business with Target. People could not believe it. This is a man who showed up to the Roots picnic with a big blown-out afro, giving full Questlove energy, wrapping himself in the imagery of the movement, and then pivoted straight into a deal with the very company the movement was boycotting. As more than one voice in the culture put it, it started to look a certain way. Y'all let him play in your face. And that is when Memphis Bleek, the loyal soldier himself, accidentally pulled the pin on the whole conversation. Bleek went on a podcast, and, long story short, his position was, we are not activists. Why are y'all expecting us to move like that? Why are y'all expecting us not to do business with Target? Jay-Z does not have to explain himself to anybody. And listen, on one level, Bleek was being honest, maybe the most honest anybody from that camp has ever been. He was saying the quiet part into the microphone. Stop expecting your entertainers to be your freedom fighters. And some people actually agreed with him, because there is a real argument that elevating rappers and athletes to leadership status, hanging on everything they do, expecting billionaires to make unselfish decisions, is a setup for disappointment every single time. Nobody expects a rock star to carry a community. Nobody asks a country singer where he stands on the struggle. But here is the counter that people kept coming back with, and it is the one that turns this from a gossip story into something that genuinely matters. It goes back to what Malcolm X said decades ago, and the words still land like a verdict. Malcolm pointed out that we are the only community that elevates entertainers to the level of leaders and then acts surprised when they fail us. He said it plainly. Show him where in the white community a comedian is a leader. Show him where a singer, a dancer, a trumpet player gets treated like the voice of a people. He called them puppets and clowns, figures set up over the community, made famous, and trained to say exactly what the people in power want to hear. And when you hold that framework up next to the Jay-Z story, a lot of people felt a chill of recognition. Because maybe the mistake was never Jay-Z's. Maybe Jay-Z was always exactly what he said he was. The mistake was ours for crowning him. And honestly, that is the wrestling match at the center of all this, because I want to be straight with y'all about where I land. I do not dislike Jay-Z, and I do not like Jay-Z either. I appreciate the rapping. I appreciate the fact that the man climbed from absolutely nothing to a stadium in the Bronx 3 nights running, and I refuse to pretend that climb is not one of the most remarkable things this culture has ever produced. But I have also stopped expecting anything from him, and that is where so many people get tripped up. Because here is what nobody wants to admit out loud. Jay-Z never once promised to speak for the community. He never campaigned for sainthood. He never asked to be anybody's leader. He told us from the very first album what the mission was, and the mission was never us. The mission was him, his family, his money, his legacy, full stop. Every scandal we covered tonight, every abandoned partner, every borrowed flow, every deal signed over a boycott line, every $4,800 story, all of it is consistent with a man who simply did what he said he was going to do from day one. Think about it like this. People act crazy on a regular payday. You have literally watched somebody get a small raise and suddenly act brand new with the same friends they were splitting plates with the month before. That is ordinary human behavior with ordinary money. Now scale that up to $1 billion and tell me why we expect the opposite. The more money a person stacks, the further they drift from the reality of the people they came from. And billionaires do not walk among the people. They walk among lawyers, accountants, and other billionaires, because at that altitude, every relationship is a liability assessment. Memphis Bleek said it himself years ago, talking about walking into Jay-Z's place back in the day, right there in the middle of the projects, and the inside was already fully decked out like a movie set, while everybody outside the door was still in the struggle. Even then, before the fame, before the billions, the man was living 10 steps ahead of his surroundings. That is not a criticism. That is just the blueprint, pun fully intended. Jay-Z was always going to be Jay-Z's first priority, and expecting anything else was a projection we built, not a promise he broke. And yet, the reason this story has real tension, the reason 3 sold-out stadium shows cannot fully settle the argument, is that Jay-Z did not just take the money and disappear. He stayed on the throne and kept asking for the crown's privileges. He accepted the icon status, the movement imagery, the Roots picnic afro, the role of elder statesman speaking directly to the culture about the culture. You cannot cash the checks of a symbol and then file the taxes of a private citizen. That is the contradiction people are actually mad about, and it is a fair thing to be mad about. When the underworld of Jay-Z criticism started rising to the surface in recent years, the complaint was not that he got rich. It was the audacity of the arc. You cannot be the man who told us about the greatest life for 3 decades, rubbed every win in our faces, outlasted everybody, and then, when the bill for the community stuff comes due, shrug and say I never signed up for that. It felt like the homie leaving the block, coming back in a spaceship, looking at everybody still standing on the corner, and saying, "Hey, y'all still doing this?" That is the wound, not the money, the distance. So let us bring every thread home, because this is the part of the night where the picture finally comes into focus, and I need y'all to look at the whole wall at once. In 1996, a talented kid gets buried under the greatest release year in rap history, and instead of accepting the shuffle, he studies the 2 men at the top, learns from one, absorbs the other, and when tragedy empties the throne, he is the only one standing close enough to claim it. Then, when the biggest ghost of them all, Tupac, leaves behind a catalog the culture treats as sacred ground, he walks straight onto that ground, lifts a song from a man who dissed him, and converts it into the love anthem that launches the most powerful marriage in entertainment history. Then, when the partnership that built his empire stops being profitable, he dissolves it with surgical calm and lets his day one brother sink in public, because that is what the business side of the game demands. Then, when the community draws boycott lines and asks its biggest star to stand with them, he signs with the NFL, signs with Target, and sends his most loyal soldier out to explain that they were never activists to begin with. And through every single chapter, the money only moved one direction. Just like that CEO said, nobody makes money with Jay-Z but Jay-Z. Now here is the revelation, the one that reframes all of it, and I want you to hear it clearly. There is a famous line from The Usual Suspects that people have attached to Jay-Z for years. The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he did not exist. But I do not think that is Jay-Z's trick at all. Jay-Z's trick is bigger and quieter than that. The greatest trick Jay-Z ever pulled was convincing the culture that his crown was a reward for greatness alone, when it was actually the product of the most disciplined, most ruthless, most patient strategy hip-hop has ever witnessed. The talent was real. Nobody is taking the pen away from him. But talent was the engine, not the map. The map was knowing exactly when to borrow, exactly when to cut ties, exactly when to marry, exactly when to partner, exactly when to stay silent, and never, not once in 30 years, letting the plan show. He did not convince the world he did not exist. He convinced the world he was inevitable. And inevitability is the one story you can never argue with, because every year you argue, he wins again. That is why Yankee Stadium matters more than the music, and this is the loop we opened at the very top. So let me close it for you. 3 nights, sold out, in the city that invented this whole culture, in front of crowds that knew every word of songs older than some of them. And the show opened with Beyonce cutting his hair under the lights, and everybody read it as a beautiful gesture, a wife freshening up her husband before his victory lap. But look at it again through everything we just walked through. That was not grooming. That was myth-making. It was the architect unveiling the restoration, showing you the old Brooklyn Jay-Z, the hungry one, the underdog, precisely because the underdog is the character who gets cheered. A billionaire cannot play the people's champ with a straight face, so he brought the 1996 version of himself out of storage, let his queen present him to the crowd like a relic, and then performed the comeback narrative to perfection. Even the coronation was strategy. Even the nostalgia was product. And the craziest part? It worked flawlessly. The reviews were ecstatic. The streets were proud. The flowers got thrown. Because that is what he does. He does not hide the trick. He performs it in front of tens of thousands of people at maximum volume, 3 nights in a row, and walks off stage richer every single time. So where does that leave the rest of us? The ones who watched, the ones who bought the albums, the ones who crowned him? Honestly, it leaves us with a choice, and it is a grown folks' choice, so no wrong answers. You can look at Jay-Z as the culture's greatest success story, a self-made billionaire who beat a system designed to bury him, took nothing from anybody that was not already leaving, and owes nobody an apology for winning. Or you can look at him as the culture's most talented supervillain, a man who treated brotherhood as overhead, history as inventory, and the community as a marketing demographic, and made it all look like destiny. Or, and this is the take that keeps me up at night, he is both, at the exact same time. And the reason that is so hard to sit with is because deep down we know he simply played the game better than it has ever been played, and we keep expecting the game to have a conscience it was never built with. Because here is the final truth, and then I am handing this whole thing over to y'all. Jay-Z did what he was going to do from the beginning. He said it himself, over and over, in every era. Make the money, secure the family, build the legacy, retire a king. He never lied about the mission. He lied about nothing. The only people who ever got hurt were the ones who heard the mission statement and decided, on their own, that they were the exception to it. Dame thought brotherhood was the exception. Bleak thought loyalty was the exception. The community thought culture was the exception. And one by one, each of them found out the same thing at a different cost. There are no exceptions. There is just the plan, and the plan worked. 17 albums. 3 decades. 1 stadium, 3 nights, sold out. Hip-hop's most talented supervillain, or its final boss, depending on which side of the receipt you were standing on. Now I need to know where y'all land on this, because this one is genuinely dividing the culture down the middle. First question, does remaking Tupac's song, A Man Who Had Dissed Him, count as genius business or straight-up disrespect to the dead, and would you have the nerve to do it? Second, if you woke up tomorrow with $1 billion, is anybody in your family ever asking you for $4,800 at a cookout, or is everybody already straight? Be honest. And third, the big one, is Jay-Z the greatest career hip-hop has ever seen, or just the best executed plan the culture ever fell for? Get in the comments and make your case, because I read every single one, and the best takes are going straight into the follow-up. And if you rock with deep dives like this, the playlist is sitting right there waiting on you, because the story we are covering next involves another king, another empire, and a betrayal that makes Dame Dash look like a polite disagreement. Trust me, you do not want to miss it. I will see y'all there.